take questions, so just go on mute for the time being. So welcome everybody on behalf of the GCC Board Directors Institute to our webinar today on understanding family dynamics and family conflicts in collaboration with PwC. I am the Executive Director of the GCC Board Directors Institute, and just a few words about us. As I'm sure many of you know, we're a not-for-profit company based in the UAE, but we cover all the 6 countries of the Gulf, and we really spend most of our time supporting boards in the region and board directors, whether they're family businesses, listed companies, large private companies, government entities, to build board director capabilities, create a regional network of directors, and really try to raise the level of corporate governance in the region and board effectiveness. We have over 2,000 members. A lot of you here today are members of the Institute, so and you know a lot of the work that we do, running workshops, customized workshops for boards, board evaluations, corporate governance work, director coaching, and some research and surveys. I just wanted to emphasize a few things. We've recently launched a board opportunities service. So if you are a company that is looking for or a board that's looking for an independent director, you can advertise your board vacancies free of charge on our website, and these are available to our members. And we also have a directors register, which is only available for our members, where they can publish their CV on that register. And companies who don't necessarily want to advertise for board vacancies can use that register to search for an independent director. We run many workshops and webinars. This is one of them, as you can see, and many other webinars, workshops coming up. You can find our calendar on our website. And these are just some of the upcoming events. We have our networking event where we're going to be looking at diversity and inclusion. We have some great speakers joining us for that networking event on the 25th of April. On the 26th of April, we will have Alison, who's actually with us on this webinar today, running a tutorial for us on the art of minute taking for boards and board committees. 27th of April, we have another webinar, which is a free webinar again, and that's about improving board dynamics with Heidrick and Struggles. And then in May, we're going to be launching our Ask the Expert series, and each month we will have a free event for our members on a particular topic. We're kicking off in May with talent management, how to attract and retain the best. In June, we're looking at mergers and acquisitions, and in July, we're looking at integrated thinking and the art of integrated reporting. And as I said, there will be one each month. And then finally, we have our online workshop in June on ESG, hot topic at the moment as well, and the future of sustainability for businesses. So without more ado, just some rules of engagement for the webinar today. We are in meeting mode, so please do put your video on if you would like to. It would be great to see you all there. Please put your sound on mute while the presenters are talking. Please do engage. We really would like to hear from you. We want this to be as interactive as possible. If you can ask questions using the chat function, that would be great. But you can also raise your hand, and I'm sure we can unmute and take that. We are planning to record the session very shortly, so which will be for internal purposes, basically. And then, above all, enjoy. This is really meant to be an enjoyable session, and we hope that you get a lot out of it on this challenging topic. So I'm going to introduce Amin Nasser and his colleague Abed Bazi, both from PwC. As I'm doing that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that they can share their screens with you and introduce you to, first of all, Amin. So Amin is a senior advisor to the Middle East private business practice of PwC. He's an ex-PwC senior partner in the UAE and has been with PwC in Dubai, London for over 30 years. Amin was responsible for developing PwC's activities in family business advisory, and he was also a member of the PwC Middle East leadership team and a director on the PwC Middle East Regional Board. He's got huge experience with family businesses in the Middle East, and he's worked with a large number of families, advising them on key family issues such as continuity, succession planning, and conflict management. And he's also helped establish ownership and governance and family constitutions and protocols. His colleague joining us today, Abed Bazi, is a forensic services leader at PwC and a partner with PwC here in the Middle East. He's got over 13 years of specialized financial crime investigation and prevention experience across a broad range of industries. Prior to that, Abed was a managing director leading the forensic services practice for a boutique firm, and prior to that, worked for Big Four firms in the Middle East. And I'm going to let them say a few words when they each speak, but right now I'm going to pass over to Amin. So Amin, the floor is yours. Just a reminder for those joining us, please go onto mute, do put your videos on, and we'll take questions on the chat towards the end.
Okay. Jane, thank you so much for that introduction, and I really want to thank you and GCC BDI for giving us the opportunity to speak on this platform. I also want to thank all of you dialing in, and I hope that you're doing well and your families are keeping safe in these very challenging times. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm just going to kind of move on. Yeah, so the topic, as Jane said today, the topic that I'm going to cover today, or we're going to cover today, is really understanding family dynamics and understanding family conflicts. This is a hot topic, as some of you have already alluded to. It's an extremely important topic. Unresolved family conflicts and unresolved dynamic family feuds, if you like, have caused a lot of issues in the Middle East, and not just the Middle East, throughout the world. These are family businesses' greatest enemies. So what we're going to talk about from a dispute point of view is we'll cover very quickly the overview of family businesses in the Middle East. We'll then get into the reasons why conflict occur in family businesses and the core issues that are likely to cause conflicts for family businesses. And we'll talk about the impact, because there's a lot of negative impacts that family conflicts cause, obviously, as far as family wealth is concerned and family relationships are concerned. And then my colleague Abed is going to go through some examples on how we go about resolving family conflicts, either by reconciliation or arbitration, or by investigation, and you'll hear all about it from Abed. And then we'll finally round it up by just giving you some tips as to what steps family businesses can take to minimize conflicts within families. And the next, yeah. So in terms of overview, look, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but as you know, family businesses began, in the Middle East as entrepreneurs 70 odd years ago, and they've over the years have diversified their businesses, have created very successful conglomerates, some of them, and in all sense and purposes, the family businesses in the Middle East are considered quite young. Most of the family businesses are in the second generation, going into the third generation, and these families are a backbone as far as the economies of this region is concerned. So just to carry on with the overview, the transition of family business to the next generation is a big issue. So if you look at the percentages, about 80% of families will go through a generational change in the next 5 to 10 years. And some of you have probably heard these numbers. If you talk to financial institutions, some financial institutions have estimated that around $1 trillion will change hands from one generation to the next. The thing is, if generational change is successful, if it's carried out well, and if it's properly structured, then the family businesses will benefit. It will promote growth and stability. It will create employment. It will make the economy even stronger and create growth, obviously. But if it's handled badly, it will result into fragmentation of family businesses, and the results of this fragmentation could be catastrophic. The other thing is, unfortunately, what we have seen over the last few years, we've seen an uptick in the family conflicts in the region. Uptick in the family feuds in the region, if you like. The good thing is that we have, there's a huge respect for the older generation. And in some ways, the family businesses have been protected by that. But then what happens when the older generation are no longer there? Conflicts could surface, and this could cause enormous issues for families. Next slide. So this chart here, what I want to say here is that, look, family businesses face dual challenges. They have to operate in a very difficult economic environment. We're talking COVID-19, global economic slowdown, falling oil prices, US having a go at China. All these things cause a lot of stress from a business point of view. But if that's not enough, family businesses have also got to go through family transition of their families into the next generation and deal with family conflicts which are inevitable. But the good news is that family businesses are quite successful models. And studies have indicated that family businesses outperform other businesses by almost 15%, if not more. And that's because family businesses take a long-term view, they're conservative, they build reserves for the future, they're quite nimble, and all of that is really, really good. The bad news is that a very small percentage of these families survive beyond the fourth generation, and that's really around succession issues, generational change issues, unresolved conflicts, which we will talk about in a minute. And these are the things that causes issues for these families going forward. Next slide. So let's just talk about why conflicts occur in family businesses. But before we go into the detail, we need to just examine the dynamics of the family of the families. I mean, you've seen these three circles, the family circle, the business circle, and the ownership circle. Indeed, what we found out is that the main reason behind emergence of conflicts, if you like, is a lack of understanding and communication between these three family dimensions. So understanding these dynamics are very important. So what it means is that everyone in the family have their own point of view depending on where they sit in this circle. So let me explain. If you're an active family member, you know what's going on because you make decisions, you understand the challenges on a day-to-day basis because you're involved in the operations of the business. But if you're a passive shareholder, you don't know what's going on. And unfortunately, in family businesses, nobody bothers to tell you what's going on. And unfortunately, you don't get enough information about the inside of the business. And that lack of communication, if you like, and divergence of knowledge often gives rise to conflicts in family businesses. Next page, please. So, conflicts exists in all families. It exists in my family, it probably exists in your family, and it will most likely exist in family businesses. And in my experience, a lot of these conflicts are seldom caused by poor business performance, but a lot of these conflicts arise because there's a perception in somebody's mind that he or she is unfairly treated. And that could be right, it could be wrong, but that's it's a perception, and that comes up because of lack of communication, lack of transparency, things not properly explained, etc. And also family also wrongly assume that just because they're family, just because they're brothers and sisters, that they will always tend to agree, which is not true, because things change in the future. The other thing is that, and this is quite important, the other thing to note is that family businesses that were previously controlled by siblings from the same mother, if you like, are now being controlled by cousins who have weaker ties. And therefore, cousin consortiums are very, very difficult to manage. And therefore, it's important that they establish very strong business relationship with each other, and not just simply rely on the fact that they're cousins or brothers or sisters, etc. And finally, as I said before, as the founding generation retires or passes away, the likelihood of conflicts between the next generation family members is quite high. Next slide. So let's look at the core issues that are likely to cause conflicts in the family business. So the first one, and I'm not going to go through every one of these, but the first one is around strategy, is around having a common vision for the future. And so what do I mean by that? The family vision in terms of the ownership vision, as well as the business vision, needs to be aligned, because the lack of alignment in the vision could result into conflicts. So let me give you an example. I was in Oman a while ago, and I was talking to one of the major families in Oman, and the founder, who created a very successful conglomerate, started off from nothing, and over the years created an extremely successful business. And he said to me, look, what I want to do is I want this business to go to my children and their children, and I want to leave a legacy behind, because I've worked so hard, and I think this will benefit the future generation. They said to me, why don't you speak to my son and see what he thinks? And so I went to see him. We had a chat in his office, and then after a while, he took out his laptop, and he was showing me some spreadsheets and some cash flow forecasts, etc. And he was saying to me, in 2 years' time, we're going to go IPO. And I said to him, there's nothing wrong with IPO, as long as you do it for the right reason. But when was the last time you discussed this with your father? Because he's got a completely different vision about this business going forward. So it's really important to align the family with the direction of what it is that the family want to do in the future. The other point here is around family employment. And I can tell you, this is an extremely difficult area to manage. Performance evaluation, if you like, of family members can be extremely tricky. And it gets very sensitive, and it gets very emotional if you're in a situation where a family member is not doing well and you're about to be told to step down. It's not an easy message to give to family members. Also, there's a question of, why is he the CEO? Why am I not the CEO? Why is his son being promoted? Why is my son not being promoted? So there are a lot of issues around family employment. And as we go around the region, what I hear from a lot of family businesses is they're actually reviewing their philosophy around family employment, because what they're saying is that, look, we want to employ the best people in our business. And if they do well, we want to give them incentives, we want to promote them, we want to give them bonuses, etc. But if they don't do well, we'll ask them to leave. And we can't do that if we don't have the flexibility to do that, to ask people to leave if they're family members, because it gets very emotional. So a lot of people are reviewing what is it that they need to be doing around family employment. I'm not saying, this is right or the other thing's right. It all depends on the family. And for those family businesses who decide to allow family members working in the business, they better have extremely good rules to govern family employment. So this is an area of conflict. The other area of conflict is, we talked about transparency, and we talked about communication. And I just want to talk to you about a recent experience I had in this area, in a family in this region. There's a family in this region that obviously the shareholders were not being communicated properly. There was no transparency, and the company was not doing well. So the next thing we find is the shareholders accusing the family members who managed the business of mismanagement. And in this particular case, the CEO of the business happens to be a family member, and the rest of the family were accusing this particular CEO. They wanted to know how much he was being remunerated. They wanted to know what businesses he was getting involved in, because the family suspected that he was using resources for his own personal use. So a lot of these are caused by lack of transparency and lack of understanding. The other issue is around dividends. Especially in the situation that we're in at the moment with COVID-19, where there's a decrease in the level of dividends in many families because profitability has been challenged, right? And what is important in dividends is you need to balance between the needs of the family and the needs of the business. Now, in the Middle East and in many other countries, a lot of families' lifestyle depend on the level of dividends that you provide them. It reminds me of an issue that I had with one of the families in the region again. There was a family of about 7 brothers and sisters, and one of the brothers was single, did not have any children, obviously, and every time they had a conversation around investments, he would veto it. He would say, no, that's not a good idea. And the reason why he was doing that is because he wanted to maximize the level of dividends and not allowing the family to reinvest. And this went on for many years, and the other shareholders knew that this was a problem until one day it just rose to its ugly head. And when an opportunity came, the family was awarded a huge contract by the government into billions of dollars. But in order to execute that contract, they needed bank finance, and the banks were saying to them that, look, no problem in giving you finance, but you need to capitalize your retained earnings. You need to increase your capital. I don't want to get into the technical side of things, but in order to do that, the shareholders had to sign off saying they're happy for their retained earnings to be capitalized. Guess who said no? It was that one particular family member who wanted to maximize dividends. And to cut a long story short, the family finally had to negotiate an exit as far as that family member is concerned, and they had to pay a huge premium on the valuation in order to get him exited out of the business and sign off on the retained earnings being capitalized. So that's just one of the impacts of dividends and all of that. It causes a lot of issues. The lack of proper methodology for exiting family members and valuing shares, etc., causes a lot of issues as well. And you can imagine what happens, if you're a shareholder who's about to leave and you don't have, or your family doesn't have a proper agreed methodology around valuation, the family member who will exit will always claim that their shares are worth a lot more than what they really are. And therefore, the whole issue of exit and valuation becomes extremely important. In-laws, I don't have to tell you much about this. We've seen a lot of issues around in-laws, and if you're not careful, in-laws can actually cause a lot of issues and turn out to be outlaws. Then finally, unique to this region, you have, and we've seen this quite a lot recently, you have a situation where a founder has got 2 wives or 3 wives, and there are a number of issues between the different branches of the family. And that's all fine when the founder is alive, because he's able to manage it. He's able to manage the different branches. But we have a situation at the moment where founders just passed away, and there's a huge issue between the 2 different branches of the family who've just inherited their shares. So that's another source of conflict in family businesses. Next slide, please. So, with PwC, we do a lot of surveys. In fact, we do a survey every 2 years, and we've just released, and I was talking to Jane earlier on, we've just released our 2021 survey yesterday. Some of the results in our previous survey on family conflicts reveal the following. half of the families have argued about the future strategy of the business. I mean, we talked about that already. More than 40% argued about performance of family members in the business. This is all around employment issues and things like that. 25% argued about remuneration levels. And over 70% do not have any procedures for dealing with family disputes. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide, please. So just quickly, what is the impact of conflicts on family wealth? And now, sadly, conflicts between family businesses or family members can destroy successful family businesses in terms of reputation, in terms of the structure of the businesses, the fact that businesses could disintegrate into much smaller, less effective units if you're not careful. And in some families, we found that the egos are so much at play that the family members just don't care that this is going to destroy value of their businesses. And obviously, as family members start fighting against each other and feuding against each other, you know, the family harmony and cohesion is negatively impacted. And a lot of these conflicts end up in family members not just leaving the family business, but leaving the family itself. And that's not good. So we've seen a number of, you know, over the years, we've seen a number of family disputes ending up in courts. And, you know, once they get into courts, the courts have a very strict rule in terms of managing assets under dispute, and mostly end up freezing assets for a long time. So you could have a business that's doing really, really well, but the family conflicts can completely derail it. And I remember a very famous business owner once saying, to succeed in business, but to fail the family is to fail. It doesn't matter how much money you make, but in the process of making all this money, if you fail the family, what have you achieved? Next slide. So very quickly here, you know, again, our survey, again, numbers, you know, in a recent survey that we did on family conflicts, 59% of the family businesses, and this is around managing conflicts, said that, you know, conflicts are handled within the family. And actually 25% of the families said that they use third-party mediation, which we'll talk about in a minute. You know, the governments in this region are extremely concerned about family businesses being fragmented and being disintegrated. A number of judicial committees have been set up, and Abid is going to talk more about that in his session. And what the governments are doing is that, look, you know, once these families begin fighting, there's a strong chance that they will be fragmented, and this will have a very negative impact in the economies of the country. So that's all I'm going to say for the time being, and I'm going to pass over to Abid, who is going to talk to you about an interesting session around resolving conflicts. Abid.
Thank you, Amin. Thank you. Well, to start with, you know, a lot of the concerns that Amin touched on, and a lot of the issues that you know, family businesses do, you know, have between all families, and maybe with some of the examples that where things have escalated and reached a point where a lot of cases were filed and claims and counterclaims to a point where you know, the judges had to combine all these cases, come up with a judicial committee to really address some of the matters that those families are fighting about. And in that process, you know, whenever you're going into a litigation process, you have the lawyers involved, and that's, you know, not in all cases like a good thing to be doing, especially when you have family conflicts with lawyers being involved. We see a lot of the issues become, you know, getting into a snowball effect and getting out of scale, to be honest, and sometimes does not really reach the point where you can reconcile or mediate or get the family members together again. So some of those concerns that we've seen and like common things that we've normally seen whenever we were appointed to really help as experts to come up with like, addressing the claims that are being raised, establish the facts around the areas of concern that are mentioned and between different family members and the claims that are being put forward. There's a lot of steps to be done. We've seen a lot of issues being, raised, and the reasons for that would be, as Amin touched on, having different branches of the family. You have the founder passing away, and now the family business is an estate that is going to be distributed, and the brothers and sisters are fighting around who would manage, or if someone is actually managing, being an active manager on that family business, and having those passive shareholders. Those passive shareholders have a lot of concerns and issues around, the lack of visibility, which creates like a lot of suspicions and leads to lack of trust eventually. And this is where we can see things coming into so many claims. So to resolve such conflicts, having in mind that we want to preserve that value of the family business, we don't want to fragment it and to destroy that legacy, and to start like, having a lot of shareholders and family members exiting, which will cause that fragmentation and like the dissolution of that whole, family group. And this is a concern that all the governments have with all the impacts that it has on the economy. So to address those concerns, we really look at the actual, root causes of those conflicts and what are the things that you're concerned about. So if a group of family that do not have a visibility around, the management, and they're accusing other parts of that family of mismanagement, abusing of authority, transferring of ownership or funds, or siphoning of funds, we start first with, looking at the full family business, tracing all the assets historically, and looking at all those facts around that family business and where the investments and how did the money was spent and invested, and if there were any personal benefits or transfer of ownership. To do that, we start with asset tracing, which involves like looking at, all the assets that the family would have, including companies, real estate properties, vehicles, properties, the stock market, any stocks in those markets, any funds outside the country, as well as we see like, a lot of investments that were made, bank accounts being opened abroad as well. And we do that global asset tracing exercise to make sure that we really have the full visibility, and an independent expert is actually conducting that exercise to give that overview to all the shareholders of what was owned, and also the changes in the ownership that occurred throughout a period of time. Because if any concerns were around like, someone has actually for a personal benefit made some transfer of ownership of any of those assets throughout the period, so this can also be picked up and it can be highlighted to all the members. And if any division of or distribution of that estate or businesses, this can be factored in whenever we go into the remaining steps. The second step will be like, all the concerns that we have, some of that will be related to assets, transfer of ownership, but some of them are related to mismanagement and the management of the companies, embezzlement, corruption, and this is where investigative procedures needs to be conducted, and a review of certain accounts, transaction that might have certain red flags that would favor or like, really support that allegation that is being raised against those family members, or it will be refuted based on all the supporting documentation and all the reviews that we conduct in that regard. So gathering all this information, intelligence, doing all these investigative procedures, and maintaining our independence throughout the whole process to make sure that all the communication or all the uh, results or the outcomes of our work is factual. It's based on the facts. It's based on all the supporting documents, and that's how it's reported to the judicial committee and ultimately to the family members who are in dispute. The last part will be like whenever we've consolidated and we've managed to look at all the assets and address all the concerns and seeing like, some of the amounts that have been maybe taken, unrightfully by certain family members, we go into the evaluation of the estate or that family business to make sure that we're also getting the current value of those, keeping in mind when we're doing this exercise of valuation that we want to reconcile between the family members. We want to present options where in certain cases we can get certain family members who might share a common vision on running the business forward and taking that forward, where they can group themselves and take that part of the business and keep that operation without really disrupting the full business by saying like we want to really have that exit of certain partners, which might impact the overall value of that business. And so to preserve that value itself, we'll come up with the current value. We come up with options on the distribution of those and reconciling between family members. This would include all the properties, all the companies, and all the factoring into and deducting the amounts that would have been unrightfully taken out of the business or any properties that have been transferred, to make sure that you get the share that each family member would actually be entrusted with or deserving as part of his inheritance. So touching on that reconciliation process, with any conflict, you need to make sure that you try to bring, the common things and the common, factors that might really reconcile between those family members. In case we've highlighted some the outcomes of certain investigative procedures that did not come to a conclusion where, some family member was really involved in any of the allegations that other family members. This should bring them together again to look at ways of how to run the business going forward, how to reconcile and to manage that business, and how to really try to find a common vision that might serve that purpose going forward, instead of really fragmenting that business. I'll pass it over to Amin, maybe for the closing steps, and we'll take the questions after. Over to you, Amin.
Thank you, Abid. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues and procedures that we've got to go through when families are in conflict, and sometimes, kind of common sense prevails, but sometimes in these families, the conflicts have come to such an extent, or have reached such a level that actually the families can't just reconcile, and then it just ends up in what Abid has described as a valuation of businesses and trying to kind of distribute those businesses or assets in an amicable manner. But what I wanted to talk to you about is some of the tips, if you like, and this is not rocket science, but there's some of the things that families can do to help minimize conflicts. So, firstly, it's important that families have a common vision. We talked about alignment of vision. So today, you have a family, say, comprising 8 members or 10 members. In the next generation, every generation is about 25 years. In the next generation, you could be 20, 30, 40 family members. So it's important for families to actually look at the future and understand the barriers that they're going to face the challenges that they're going to face as a family. Things like, today it's very easy to make a decision. We're only a small family, but as the family grows to 30, 40, 50, how are we going to make decisions? What are we going to do about family employment? What happens when somebody wants to join the business? Are we going to be able to sustain the family businesses going forward? What happens if somebody wants to leave the family business and sell their shares? Are we prepared to handle that situation? So it's really about having a common vision of where the family is going to be, how are we going to treat each other and stay together in the next coming years. And then, it's very important for these families to create, if you like, rules or protocols, which basically formalizes the relationships between family members. And I said before, it's not enough that we're brothers, sisters, cousins. It doesn't mean that we're going to get along. And in this regard, often we are called when it's a bit too late, when the conflicts have already occurred, and families find it very difficult to agree with each other. The best time to create rules and formulate these protocols is when the family is at reasonable harmony. Okay, that's when families create rules. I mean, we say to a number of families, create rules when the founder is still alive, because when the founder is alive, it's much easier to create these rules and to create a situation where there's proper mentoring, there's proper, understanding between the founder and the children. And then when the founder is no longer there, the family continues. It's also very important to create forums that deal with different issues. So, for example, create forums that deal with family issues, and create forum that deals with business issues. So don't make sure that the family issues are separated from the business issues, and that's quite important, because in a number of families that I've been to see, there's huge, a confusion between family issues and business issues, etc. And also, families need to create good corporate governance. We talked about transparency, we talked about professionalizing the business. Families are looking at now creating a strong board, bringing in independent directors to come in and promote and encourage transparency, encourage accountability. The thing that families need to do is to professionalize not just the family business, but the family itself. The family itself needs to be professionalized. And also, I think it's important to treat the family in a consistent and fair manner. So what happens is the families need to be committed to fairness. And the fairness concept becomes a key ingredient when you create family rules, etc. And finally, these families need to create a proper conflict resolution mechanism, because conflicts are going to happen. Whatever you do, because of the emotional aspect of family businesses, there will be conflicts. What you don't want is families, members who are in conflict, to take their conflicts outside of the family business and share them with their friends and their advisors and things like that. Because once you do that, it's like washing dirty laundry in public, and the reputation of the family is at risk. So a lot of families are beginning to set up conflict resolution committees and mechanism where family members in conflict can air their differences in a safe environment, where there are independent people as part of the conflict resolution committee that can bring in independence, they can bring in objectivity. And in this regard, there's a good chance that family conflicts can be resolved in an amicable way internally before they get out of hand, because before they get into a situation where the conflicts just run out and become too difficult to handle. So I guess these are some of the things that we think that families should be thinking of doing. So many thanks for listening to Abid and I, and we're now open for questions.
And thank you. There's quite a lot of questions already, but I can see that Reda's got his hand up. So Reda, would you like to give us your question, and then we'll take the ones on the chat. Reda, you need to unmute first of all. You're on mute, Reda.
I'm sorry. Sorry. First of all, thank you very much for the very excellent presentation to the both presenters. I think they covered the topic really very well. My question is a very simple one. Do you agree, in order to allow the next generation to step into the family and get acquainted before the old generation die, that there is a retirement age for the family member? And if you think yes, what could be that age at which the family member should, as per the charter, as per whatever rules they have, retires and let somebody else? Thank you.
So that is a very good question, Reda, and it's and we calling letting go, and letting go is something that family businesses find very difficult. And let me tell you a story about this. So there was a family a while ago. So this was a father and son, and bear with me while I tell you the story because it's quite relevant. So the father started this business, and at a young age. And he then got his son to come in to the business, and they worked together, and the son did extremely well. They took the business to another level, and they were extremely profitable, and they grew significantly. And one day, the father calls his son into his office and says, "Look, I need to talk to you about something extremely important." So the son goes into his father's office and says, "Yes, Dad, I'm here." And he says, "Son, it's my birthday today." And the father says, and the son says, "Yes, I know. Congratulations and happy birthday and all of that." And he says, "Listen, son, I've reached an age now. I'm 85 years old, and I'd like to retire and give you the total control of the business. You've done so well, and I'm so proud of you, and I want you to kind of take this forward." So the son kind of looks down and looks up and says, "Father, thank you very much. That's a real honor, and I'm really, pleased that you've got that trust in me. But you know what? I'm 57 and I'm looking at retiring myself." and this is one of the things that happens in family businesses, where you leave it too long, and what happens that even the next generation then gets fed up, and they don't want anything to do with it. So to answer your question, letting go is extremely important. Retirement age is a big issue of debate when we talk to families about it, and it ranges between 65 years old to some people saying 80 years old. There's no hard and fast rule, but I've seen a lot of families going for 70, 75 as a retirement age, as in terms of being on the board, if you like. They retire a bit early on the day-to-day, sit on the board till they get to 70, 75, and then finally retire. But it varies from families to families. But it is a big issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reda. We have a question here from Mohammed saying, do you see any role for the regulators in the region to enforce the governance for family businesses? Bearing in mind, really, the huge risk that you've just outlined.
So look, I mean, Abid can contribute to this as well. So let me just tell you what we're doing at the moment and what we've done with another jurisdiction, and I think I can mention it. It's Saudi Arabia. We've done a lot of work with the chamber in Saudi Arabia, and our remit was governments are worried about family businesses. What can the governments do to help family sustain their businesses for the future? And so we did our research, we did our work, and a lot of the things that came out of it is that the laws in these countries need to be adjusted in order for family businesses to then do the right thing. For example, families create constitutions and protocols, but they cannot be legally incorporated quite easily. It takes a long time, and you've got to do it via shareholders agreement, via all sorts of things. And what the government in Saudi are doing now is to look at the possibility of the protocols and the shareholders agreement being incorporated as legal documents. So that's one. Another area where the law is looking at is voting rights. So, you know, in the UAE and in Saudi, you don't have voting and non-voting shares in limited liability companies. You know, all shares are voting. And, you know, with a lot of issues around passive, around active family members, around in-laws, it's quite important to have that description. And I can go on for a long time. So in summary, I think we're going through changes where I think the regulations, the legal regulations around family businesses and around, you know, how families govern themselves is undergoing change. Abid, do you want to say something more on that? You're on mute, Abid.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think you've really touched on it. You know, knowing how important, you know, and the impact of you know, any disruption in like family businesses is actually affecting the economy, especially in the GCC. You know, we've seen, like as you said, like Saudi, they're drafting the law, and it's going to be, you know, public soon, which touches on all the points that you've covered. The same thing applies to the UAE. So these are elements that the regulators and governments are actually taking part on, because they really understand how important family business plays in that economy, being as a family business, or even like having those family businesses serving you know, some of the government agendas on a bigger scale, you know, into initiatives and you know, privatizing some of the public sector, which they want them to also play a role in.
I think this is a really important area. I'm sure we're going to see more movement in this area. There's another question here, one from Basil, saying, how do you convince the father, the founder, the patriarch to take those 6 steps you mentioned in the case that, you know, he's resistant? What are your key arguments, and at what age do you do this, in a sense, his age or the company's age? At what point do you need to be having those conversations?
You know, I think these conversations are getting easier and easier. You know, a few years ago, it was a very difficult conversation to have with the founder. But in the last few years, there have been a lot of families in distress. There have been a lot of families in conflicts. And the founders see that. They look at some of the big families undergoing issues, and you know, they don't want the same to happen to their families. And therefore, I think, you know, a very kind of serious conversation with the founder around the benefits of you know, a smooth transition, if you like, into the next generation. Many founders that I've had a conversation with, you know, they've understood it, and honestly, they didn't need a lot of convincing, because all they have to do is to look around them and see some of the families that they know and love going through difficulties in this area. So you know, and as long as it's not complicated, the thing to do is to keep it simple. You know, sometimes consultants tend to overcook it, over-engineer governance and structuring of the family. It needs to be done in a simple manner, and also it needs to be done in phases. So when you say that, look, you know, you need a strong board and you need to you know, get independent directors in, they're not going to do that tomorrow. You know, because finding independent directors is difficult. Families need to trust these people. Confidentiality is a huge issue, and therefore, you know, families need to do this gradually, and you know, you need to do it in phases. But I think the conversation with founders are getting easier by the day.
Thank you. And a question here, a few families have started converting their setup, their companies, into a fund with a much stronger governance and avoiding conflicts and disturbance in the business. Do you think that's a good idea? Clearly there's no one size fits all, but is that a solution ultimately, or does it not address the fundamental issues?
I think that families, a lot of families looking at IPO, they're IPOing their businesses, thinking that if you IPO your business, you'll have better governance, you have better transparency, and all of that kind of thing. And they're right. I mean, you do, but you need to do things for the right reason. I think that you can still achieve what you want to achieve in terms of fairness, in terms of governance, in terms of rules, if you actually sit down and look at your business and create rules that work. We've done a lot of these things for different families, and they don't have to get into funds or IPOs. You can still do it. The trick is for family shareholders to buy into it. So when you talk to families and when you talk to them about their vision and what is it they want to do together and the benefit that the next generation will have, it's not that difficult to convince family members that, look, you don't have to love each other to death. You need to have a business relationship with each other, and as long as you have that understanding, and as long as people are treated in a fair manner, and as long as there's transparency and communication, then there's nothing to stop families create structures in whatever legal vehicles they're in.
So when you talk about rules, I mean, do you mean a family constitution? There's a question here. Do you need to, is a family constitution required, and how long would that process normally take, and is it legally binding?
Yeah, so we talked about this just a while ago. So yes, a family constitution basically formalizes the relationship between family members. It talks about how decisions will be made. It talks about succession. It talks about the future chairman. It talks about your board of directors. It talks about family employment rules. It talks about family exit rules. It talks about dividend, a myriad of things, right, that need to be agreed between family members. So the next question is, can it be legalized? So the answer to that is the answer to that is yes and no. So yes, to a certain extent, because what's happening at the moment is in many jurisdictions in the region, the articles of the company are kind of templates. They don't go more than 4 or 5 pages, and therefore you've got to kind of make sure that the more important aspects of the protocols are captured into these articles of the company, and the rest then stand as shareholders' agreement, and these are notarized. And as we said before, the governments are now are reviewing their company laws and trying to, and in fact in Saudi, there's a paper in place, and it's being discussed and studied at the moment by the authorities around legalizing family protocols and legalizing family constitutions. So when that happens, that will be great.
I mean, a question here that says clearly that the problem magnifies as the family expands and grows over the years, and that can often lead to more confusion, more disputes, and fragmentation. How can the impact of increasing numbers of members be controlled, or in the greater interests of the business?
Yeah, so look, I mean, there are several ways in which this can be done. I mean, some of the companies in the Far East, in Japan, and Indonesia, etc., they're into this 20th generation, if you like, and you often ask, how have they been able to survive for that long, and really. Some of the things that families have to do is to trim the tree. When you start pruning the tree, the tree gets healthier. And if there are family members who own, 1% or less than 0.5%, and they're not passionate about the business, let them go. Let them leave the business, and let them, if they want to exit the business, as long as they get a fair share of their valuation, let them go. Because and in some families, they don't allow family members to exit. Not allowing family members to exit is like putting somebody in jail. When you put somebody in jail, that person will always, every day he gets up in the morning, he'll be thinking about the key. because he wants to get out of jail. And one day he will find that key. And in the process of finding that key, there'll be blood on the floor. And you don't want that. So allowing families to exit at a reasonable price. Some families even pay a premium, by the way. There are also some structuring things, which, I mean, if somebody's interested, you can talk to me separately about it. But there are structuring issues that you can do along family branches. So family ownership, instead of being in the name of individual shareholders, can be in the name of special purpose vehicles. And that allows proper succession for the future.
I think Basma's had her hand up for a little while. Basma, welcome and ask your question.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. We did some research a few years back on family businesses in the GCC area, and the role of women came up as you were saying, in-laws. And I remember, and a few of the founders were saying around the table of the board, a lot of the issues we have are from the daughter-in-laws that are actually not attending the meetings, but are having bringing issues with brothers and having conflict. At the same time, there was also people that are having the grandmother, who would be the founder's wife, become the person who does the conflict resolution and bring everybody together and was the glue of the family. So I was wondering if you found similar findings in your research and companies that you work with. Other thing is the culture assessment. When we do culture assessment for family companies, we've noticed that there's multiple cultures depending on how many of the family members are actually active and have leading roles in the company. So you would have multiple cultures within a culture, and then the dynamics of that and the effect it has on the employees and the effect it has on the work and productivity. And I was wondering, because you didn't mention a lot about the employees and how that works, if you could talk about your findings and experience in that part.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, your question kind of raises a lot of a lot of issues, to be honest with you. So I'll try and please ask me again if I've not answered your question properly, because there were a few things there that you mentioned. So one thing about impact of employees. So what tends to happen in my experience is, and I always say to families, you need to adopt cabinet responsibility. Right. Now, what do I mean by that? When you are a family, and when you have a family meeting, either at the family council or family shareholders or the board, and you talk about things and you debate and come to some sort of agreement around it, there will be some family members who don't agree on a particular decision, okay? And those who don't agree are convinced, but are tried, or the family chairman or whoever tries to convince them that this is the right course of action. But sometimes some families disagree. And therefore, the decision is made based on the rule of the majority. Okay. But what tends to happen sometimes is, if you've got 9 members of the family, 2 say no, 7 say yes, the decision is made. They leave the room. The 2 shareholders who've said no slam the door, go out and start talking to their employees and start saying, you know what, I totally disagreed with what Ahmed was saying or Muhammad was saying, it's just crazy, And what that does is it creates fractures between the family members. And the employees are very good at this. The employees play one family against another family member. And therefore, what I say to family members is, please speak with one voice when you leave the room. It doesn't matter if you've lost the argument. Sometimes you'll be in the minority, sometimes you'll be in the majority. But when you leave the room, speak with one voice. And that's how the impact, in terms of your question around impact on employees. Can you remind me what your other question was? Sorry, Basma.
Yeah, there was another point, I mean, on the in-laws and having the mother also, like, involved in, like, resolving conflicts as well.
Yeah.
So please go ahead, take it. I mean,
okay, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I remember you asking that. So look, I think the older generation family members play a very big role in terms of trying to resolve conflicts internally before they actually get to a serious state. And a lot of the women, if you like, play a role in the family council in terms of mentoring, in terms of education, in terms of welfare, things like that. But when the conflicts reach a certain level, to be honest with you, sometimes when a family member gets involved in these conflicts, it loses that independence, because families always suspect that this person has an agenda. In my experience, when the older generation cannot resolve a particular conflict, it goes to a conflict resolution committee, and as long as this conflict resolution committee is independent and is objective and is led by people who are independent, who are respected, who are trusted by the family, and they sit down and analyze the issues, and they then kind of make recommendations. And in many cases, those recommendations are respected by the family members in conflict.
Nazma, I hope that answered all your questions or gave you some food for thought anyway. We have another question here, Amin. What is the right time for a family business to set up a board of directors? And then, you know, is that the start, or do you go straight into bringing independent directors in? What's your views on that, or your advice? What have you seen works best?
Yeah, so look, it really depends on the size of the business and the nature of business, etc. But, you know, the board is becoming increasingly important, especially when we're talking to family businesses. 2020 has been a very challenging year. You know, you've had COVID. You know, 59% of the families that we interviewed a few months ago indicated that their businesses have suffered significantly in 2020 due to COVID, and families are a bit cautiously, if you like, optimistic about 2021. They still think that 2021 is going to be difficult, but they are a bit more positive about 2022 and beyond. But there is a new norm, and business is going to be run very differently. The business landscape has changed. You know, consumer kind of experiences have changed. Consumer behavior has changed, and a number of these families are looking at their strategy going forward. You know, how are they going to deal with the future? Are they in the right businesses? Do they need to do something different? Now, in order to make those decisions, you need to have a very strong board to be able to do this, and a board that has the various skills in place. You know, you've got a commercial skill, you've got legal skill, you've got, you know, financial skills, and families are beginning to see the importance of having a strong board. Now, you know, and independent directors. In yesterday, in fact, in the panel that we had invited 3 very prominent family members, and all 3 of them have said that they have independent directors, and they're looking strongly at actually increasing the number of independent directors and reducing the number of family members on board, because they realize the importance of having a very strong and dynamic board. So to answer your question, of course, everything depends on the size of the family business. But if you really want to grow and you're serious about diversification, expanding into new markets, looking at opportunities, you need to have people who have the experience to advise you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Amin. I think that one more question here. When the family decides to hire an external non-family member as an executive, what mechanisms could they put in place to ensure that the family doesn't interfere with his or her function, and really, I suppose, to make it a success?
So I think there's 2 elements to this. There's one thing about having a director, an independent director on board, and there's another issue around having a non-family professional, for example, CEO on board. Now, unfortunately, for family businesses, the empowerment issue doesn't come in very naturally. Families find it very difficult to empower non-family members in very, very high positions. So take CEO, for instance. So if you employ a non-family member CEOs and then you tie his hands or her hands and not allowing him to make critical decisions, if that CEO is any good, they're not in there for the money. They're in there for, you know, job satisfaction and career satisfaction. And if that happens, then you're going to lose good talent. And therefore, families need to understand that empowering people is very, very important. Now, I get it. I get the fact that it's difficult. You have to trust people before you do the next thing. But the fact is, you need to do it. You have to eventually do it. You know, yes, trust comes in and you need to, you know, there's a time element as well. But if you don't do it, you will lose good talent. That's for, you know, that's as far as the CEOs are concerned. As far as the independent directors are concerned, I think the more important issues that families grapple with is the issue of confidentiality. You know, because these independent directors are not employees, if you like. They come in and you know, deal with some very important strategic issues, and a lot of families are worried about the confidentiality of these independent directors and how they maintain that confidentiality.
I mean, one more question. I have seen what I often call the family waltz, if you like, in that, you know, there's a decision made to move forward with putting good governance in a board or bringing on independent directors, or the family stepping back from the day-to-day running of the business. And then 6 months down the road, you know, it doesn't happen, or they take back control. Again, any advice as to what is the best way forward for families? Where do they start? Where should they start?
Yeah, I think whatever you do, you have to you have to a big bang approach is not advisable, because you know, you will most likely not succeed. But once you decide to professionalize, you need to go ahead with that journey. And professionalizing doesn't mean professionalizing the business only. And as I said, it's professionalizing the family themselves. You know, the family themselves need to be professional as well. And I think that you know, if you get into this journey of professionalizing the family business and putting in a strong board, having independent directors, maybe employing a non-family CEO, you need to have mechanisms that will help you achieve that. And I think as long as it's a phased approach, and as long as there's a plan in place, I don't see any issues. I mean, I'll give you an example. There's a family in Saudi, and actually I can mention their names because they're very open about what they've done. This is Masik. I don't know whether you've heard of them, but Abdulaziz Al-Sabay is one of the directors in Masik, and this, I'm not revealing any secrets, but they decided to professionalize their business 5 years ago, and to put in an independent board, to remove family members working in the business from a day-to-day basis, and to basically make sure that the next generation concentrate more on the entrepreneurial side, etc., etc. And cut a long story short, in 5 years, they have more than tripled their profits because of the obvious benefits that they've got from this professionalization journey. Was it easy? Of course not, but they were determined to do it.
They are a great example, actually. I've met them thanks to you, and both you know, second and third generation, and they're doing a great job. So they are a great example to look at. I think we've probably exhausted the questions, and thank you for all of those. Mark, have you got a question? Was that a hand up? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's a very fascinating presentation by Amin and David. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say, I mean, I ran the global investment banking business, actually global corporate investment banking business for National Bank of Abu Dhabi for nearly 10 years until the merger. And we had a huge portfolio of family businesses in the bank. And when I sat face to face with the owners of, the basically founders of these businesses, they often ask this question: how do we protect the business we created? And I always thought, if I were to think about one item only to advise them, to advise on what to do, was to actually ask them to float like 25 to 30% of the business, and let it be like through an IPO, because I thought that this is probably the most important thing to ensure transparency, disclosure, protect the shareholders, the minority shareholders, so the family members can be able to do what they wanted to do if in the absence of the minority shareholders. What's your views? I thought personally that this was probably the most important advice I gave to many of them, and I think one of them didn't follow, and they regretted this very, very, very badly later on. I wouldn't mention the name. And the top member of the family, he came and said, I wish we did this when, a few years ago, we wouldn't be in the problems we're facing today. What's your views, Amin and others?
So look, I mean, Mark, you raise a very interesting point, and I can't disagree with you because I know that getting families to going IPO has its advantages. Of course, it does. You have a transparent board, you have an exit mechanism, and all of the good things that follow. But but there are also a number of advantages, a number of situations where families have said, look, we will go on an IPO when the time is right and for the right reasons. As far as the sustainability of family businesses are concerned, there are other ways in which we can deal with that. And the most important way to deal with that is to ensure that family shareholders are engaged and they speak with one voice and they are structured properly. So of course IPO helps, and I think it depends on the family. But different families have dealt with this particular issue differently. The family that I spoke about, Masick, I mean, that particular family will not look at going for an IPO because that will resolve their family issues, because they're not worried about that. They might go for IPO for another reason, but not for sustainability of their family business, because they're happy that the existing structures that they have will protect the family, will protect the minority shareholders. So I guess, look, you're right in saying that there are strong advantages for families going for IPO, but I don't think that's the only way to do it. There are other ways to achieve this.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think if anybody's got one more question, we can take it. Otherwise, we will wrap up. Any hands going up? I think I think there's just a comment here from Abdul Rahman. I think in general, the glue that keeps the families together is respect. And once it's lost or vanishes, that's when conflict arises. And yes, and often the respect is the patriarch, as we've said, because he's the one that keeps it all together. Amin, Abed, thank you very much. Is there a final comment either of you would like to make in terms of the topic today, or where would if you were a family business listening to this and you hadn't started this journey, where would you start? What would the first thing you'd do tomorrow?
I think really what you've got to do as a family is you've got to sort of sit down and get away from your day-to-day business and say, what is it that we want to be in 5 years' time? What is it that we want to be in 10 years' time? What is our vision as a family? And if you start off with that and try and kind of look at the things that the families will face, the challenges that families will face going forward, and then start to create these structures or rules that will then keep you together. And actually my biggest advice as well is to do it when the founders are still alive, because I find that in a number of families where these rules have been, the protocols, the constitutions that we've been talking about are carried out when the founders are still alive, have actually been quite successful. Because the founder's there sharing some of his or her wisdom, and that works really well in terms of the glue, as one of your audience says, that keeps them together.
Absolutely.
And I would like to add to that, maybe just like communication between the family members and keeping that, because when we come in, we see that all the claims or the allegations that have been raised could have been really avoided if there were proper communication channels between the family members. And which lays out the foundation for the trust between people and the transparency among everything else. So, I mean, I would close it with only that remark. And we've said a lot.
Yeah,
And
well
thank you
said.
very much.
Well said.
Thank you very much indeed, both Armin and Abed. Thank you everybody for joining today and for all your questions. We will send you a copy of the presentation. We will also send you a copy of this report that on family businesses in the Middle East following the survey. And if you have any more questions at all on the topic, don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and we'll happily put you in contact with Armin and Abed if you want further information. Thanks everybody. And just a reminder, our next event is on diversity and inclusion. We'll send you some more information on that if that's a topic that is hopefully of interest. Okay. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Bye.